My name is Eric Meyer. I'm the founder and executive director of Generation Atomic. And thank you for joining us today in this discussion of nuclear advocacy at the climate talks, past, present, future. Today, we will be thinking back to some memories from previous COPs, some lows, some highs, some lessons learned. Also be examining different trends in communication, trends in technology, and the interplay between them. We'll have a lively discussion and some fantastic panelists with us, which I will introduce now. So here we have Myrto Tripathi from France, who I met first in 2015 at COP21 before Generation Atomic even existed, or working on nuclear together. Myrto, you've had a career in the nuclear industry before that moment, so help us out from then until now, where you are the head of an NGO called Voices of Nuclear.
I'll try to do it really quickly. Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you, all of you. A pleasure to be here. Indeed, I did work 10 years in the nuclear industry before I realized that my work as an engineer and as a professional was not, didn't amount to much. Because as long as we hadn't solved the communication problem and the public acceptance problem, then none of all the beautiful tools for decarbonizing the world would ever be put to use. So I left just when the Paris Agreement, the COP21 arrived, was under sight, and this is when I think most of what we call now the pioneers met at that occasion, all trying in their own little way, not having any organization, not having any network, no idea of what they would do and how and when and what. Decided to just start talking to one another and see how we could each contribute. So I did spend from that moment on, which was 2015, nearly 3 to 4 years into the COPs negotiation circuits with the UN Global Compact, trying to mobilize business and solutions next to the diplomats and the NGOs that were already there. And after those 4 years, I was even more desperate because I realized that nuclear was not part of the conversation, and the other technologies would contribute, but certainly not solve on their own the issues we were facing, which is why in 2018, I decided to create the Voices of Nuclear. A lonely creation, as I'm sure Generation Atomic was when it was created at first as well. It's probably roughly at the same time.
2016.
We'll see where I'll be 2 years from now when I'll reach the same maturity than you guys did. That's it.
All right. So in our discussion today, one of the things I want to explore is sort of the timeline, the trends, the crescendo of nuclear advocacy at this event here. And I know some of us have been there in the early days and have witnessed maybe, and not just this event actually, nuclear advocacy in general. So the question I wanted to ask here is maybe about a time where things seemed a bit desperate, seemed a bit lonely, and just holding on to a shred of hope that perhaps our message could gain some traction here. Does maybe Myrto might have an idea of something? I don't know, just because you're around in the early days. Any moments of hopelessness in those early days?
I think I did go retrospectively. I didn't realize at the time through serious eco-anxiety. In 2017, after 3 years of COPs, where I was embedded. Nobody really knew I came from a nuclear background. I was UN Global Compact. I was perfectly respectable from the outside. Couldn't really express what I thought really. So it was a lonely time because my entire professional environment was absolutely not ready to hear anything I had to say. My personal and family environment, which was pretty leftist, was not ready to hear what I had to say either. My older sister, too, was really close. I have a family of scientists and engineers. Thought I was losing it when I started saying that Fukushima had not done any serious harm to people. So it was a little lonely while I increasingly saw how serious climate change was, even though I was one of the early adopters or yes, I guess, of the gravity of it all. And when I realized through those 3-4 years of COPs, where all the technological solutions that they were promoting, and like all of them were there, none of them would actually do it. And people that were at the COPs were not really interested about whether it worked or not, or at what scale. And I find my way in a situation in 2017 where I wouldn't go back to the nuclear industry because it was collapsing, and it had virtually collapsed. I mean, Arriva had collapsed, Westinghouse had collapsed, GE was not collapsing, but almost, just because it was a tiny piece of a huge machine. Everyone was out of nuclear. Everything was shutting down. I didn't want to go to all the new technologies because I didn't believe they were actually capable of bringing it at scale. And a lot of people were there, and I didn't know so much about them either. And I didn't see myself changing entirely job and being, I don't know, strategy or, advisory to some kind of handbags or yogurts or whatnot. And I did have 6 months of a very, very lonely time when I just did really ask myself what I was going to do with my life and with everyone else's life.
Yeah. Well, in every hero's journey, you have to have the low point. You're reminding me of a few experiences from the early days for myself as well. I'm thinking of COP22 in Marrakesh, where the pro-nuclear contingent consisted of me, 4 other people, a couple from Europe, one from the U.S., and the Russian government. We had a few friends from IAEA as well, I should include in that, who were there. But yeah, it was quite small, and the message was very hard to get out. The year after, we had a bit more investment, a bit more organization. It was the first year we handed out the nuclear bananas with the stickers on them in Bonn. But it was also the same year that the World Nuclear Association attempted to sponsor a session at the Sustainable Innovation Forum, which was maybe the highest profile side event, was initially accepted, and then word spread up the chain to the United Nations Environmental Program, who was in charge of the programming of this. And they said, wait a second, nuclear is going to be in a plenary discussion? Send them their money back. They're not allowed. And we did not get a seat at the table there. So we ended up setting our own, literally outside, and sitting there in the cold German wind and a little bit of rain, trying to hand out croissants to passersby and get them to hear what we had to say for a few minutes. That was probably the lowest point for me emotionally during this entire journey.
May complete, if you don't mind. I mean, what was really difficult when I was in the climate negotiations is that I had access to UN negotiators and the rooms, and we could see what I was promoting an event that we created in Paris 2015, which was the Business and Climate Summit. So you were supposed to be in contact with what would be the business world trying to bring solutions, the engineering, the governments that had nuclear in their mix, the French government, the first one of them, and all of those people. And everyone was shutting down nuclear completely. It was an absolute taboo. The people who should have been the first one to at least recognize the facts, the technical facts at it, would not dare. And everyone was talking about being bold, being courageous, putting everything back on the table, like attempting to save humanity by being innovative and creative and opening up your mind to everyone else, but not that far. Sustainable Energy for All, or even the business coalitions like Women Business, WBCSD, all those guys, ICC. I mean, you would expect them to be used to endorse the bad guy and to pass the hard messages. Even they would not. No one would. What do you do?
Yeah, you keep fighting, right?
You keep fighting on the street, yeah.
Agree, and this wasn't in my original outline, but I'm glad we're exploring it. I'll say one more thing before we kind of pivot to the next part of this conversation, which is that land use injustices are definitely not unique to nuclear energy. I'm thinking of the First Nations people in Quebec who were displaced from their lands for all the hydro. These are traditional fishing lands going back thousands of years, just being taken away for a song. Very small amounts of money, people displaced, entire way of life lost. There's a tribal community, one of the largest tribal communities in the U.S. that's been fighting a wind installation project in Oklahoma, and also the Sami people in northern Finland. Greta Thunberg joined them for this protest against a new wind installation there. So land use issues are definitely not unique to nuclear, but I hope that the nuclear industry can respect them as we go forward towards that brighter future with that clean energy transition. Great. So we got a couple engineers here, but I wanted to get your read. What's more helpful? That there are reactor designs that are, passively inherently safe because of the physics that we can talk about in our advocacy there, or recycling of nuclear waste, for example, or let's call them communication innovations of, bringing a fuel pellet around and saying this is the same as a ton of coal, or a polar bear named Melty. So when people think the word melt, they think about climate change, not about meltdowns, having that semantic shift. So another communications innovation there. Talk to me a little bit about, in advocacy, how those interplay in effectiveness.
Yeah, I guess I never felt myself as a communicator, and I think it was a pretty bad one. But I really thought that something needed to be done, as I said earlier. I tried to see what I was could make sense. And I'm saying this because what we see today in the COP, in the climate, whatever time is left for us and everything, is that people should be fighting on the results that they get from all the path and all the attempts and all the solutions that we see around in the COP, but they're still fighting on the intentions. So we're not there yet because no one's aligned. What we can see in the COP, and I'm sorry to pass that pretty strong and stark message, is that we're not aligned. We should be fighting on who does better, but no one is doing so much progress at all. So we still need everyone to not look at what we did in the past, but see what you guys can do now. And the way I managed it back in the days when I thought that I didn't have much to bring to the conversation, I was good in nuclear and I knew and I was legitimate to talk about it. That was where I should focus. People who tell me, why didn't you promote solar or wind? And I was like, there was plenty of other people doing it. And I didn't know anything about it. So, how stupid would I have looked if I'd started talking about it? So I chose something I knew. Then I realized I was a woman, I was relatively young, I was not white, and that probably would change the outlook of the average pro-nuclear French person who was above 60, white with a suit and blah, blah, blah. You know the story. So I was like, well, just maybe advertising myself, even if I say nothing, could work. And the third thing is that I applied my reasoning as an engineer. So I was not so innovative at all. I just said, people in their decision making, I think, apply probability. And when you tell them that something, which is nuclear power, does no good, even if it has a tiny risk, it's still too much, right? For something that brings no benefits. If you start increasing the benefits part, even if that risk thing still is there, it puts it back in perspective. Second reasoning, it's what I call the bench paradigm, which is if you look at nuclear as if it was under a microscope with nothing on it, on a bench that's clear, that is white in absolute terms, then yes, you want it to be perfect. But if you put it back in perspective with the alternatives, with the benefits it brings to the people, to the society, then it changes completely the outlook you have of it. And finally, the third very important point, which all of those understanding impacted the way I decided to communicate with it, when you realize that the opponents to nuclear power always talk about potential, future risks, things people like us engineers, we don't know how to answer to. Because yes, it's always, there's always a tiny possibility that things could happen. And their strategy is to always build up a risk that you cannot demonstrate against. And since we're with engineering scientific backgrounds, we don't want to lie by saying, there's zero risk. Their strategy was that, to project you in the future and to force that communication to be like this. So apply your skills to that new field, because it has to be occupied, and see what you can do with it.
Seen a lot of just talking head panels, and I bet our audience has some amazing questions. So I'm going to go ahead and cross the rest of mine off and point to Johan.
Thank you so much for the talk. I was just wondering, because when we talk about waste management, and now you have not in waste management, but decommission, what is your thought about the argument that we sometimes talk about waste as something that can be reused and something that can be reprocessed and be used in new reactor technologies? Because when I talk to policymakers or other technical people, it doesn't resonate with them. So why don't we only just focus on, we have a solution as deep geological repositories, as in Finland and now doing in Sweden, and stop talking about this potential for a future where we maybe can reprocess the waste. It sounds good, of course, but it's not like feasible right now. So why don't we only just stick to the argument about having these deep geological waste repositories as of the JRC, the European Joint Research Center? They conclude that this is the scientific consensus of handling high-level waste. So what are your thoughts on that argument of using the future argument of potential waste burners and fourth-gen reactors that can use waste?
The advantage of having done this for some time is that you've gone through a lot of fails, and one of them is trying to have one message that works for everyone. So I think a lot of those messages work on different people, and I think we probably need them all. And the real skill at the end, you realize, is to try to understand who you have in front of you, and what will work with this person will be totally different from another one. That being said, I agree with you that contrary to what we will all have intuitively as an answer, that yes, the fact that it can be reused, it's a circular economy, it's entirely recyclable, kind of renewable, all of those things we tend to say, does not work so much. It stays very abstract, it doesn't come down to people's lives. And so this answer, a lot of people would actually find arguments against that answer you propose, which I think works for some people. So the only thing I'm going to do is propose a third one that I just discovered recently, so that you have three, which actually works pretty well. That's why I'm sharing it, is to say that nuclear waste is not a pollution. And to remind everyone that it's two different concepts, because since nuclear waste is generated in small quantities within the industrial process and remains in that industrial process all its life long, it never touches people, never touches the environment. And people care about that. And they realize that, oh, okay, it's not a pollution, and everything does waste, and it does less waste with less impact than all the other alternatives. And now it becomes, it also can be recycled because research is working and science is progressing. And don't worry, not only does it have no impact on you and on your children, but at the same time, it's not going to have an impact on future generations. And that is the order with which people live. They live their day to day, then they live their day tomorrow and the week after, and only after they think about 20 years from now.
So I think in the nuclear industry, we're very good at communicating the benefits of nuclear, but sometimes tend to gloss over the risks of nuclear. And I've heard this in a panel discussion at my university where it can come across as we're trying to hide what can go wrong with nuclear, where there are risks. But how do we put it in context of the risks of climate change and people who are against nuclear, but also are against fossil fuels and only want renewables? How do we communicate the risks of not using nuclear in terms of the climate crisis?
And I want to thank you, because I think that the best news I've had for the entire COP, if that really happens, and if you really feel it like this, it's really new. It must be a year old that the industry actually talks about the benefits of nuclear. Honestly, the only thing they were doing was talk about the risks and how to mitigate the risks and how it was not so bad, but certainly never talk about the benefits. So if that's what's happening now, I guess it's just the counter movement, and it's going to come back to the center at some point. So it's not so bad. So it's rather good news. And if we talk about communication strategy a little bit, if we are under that angle, the one strategy I found, which actually shut me down from French TV not so long ago, have been shut down from French TV by the anti-nuclear movement for the past year. Because I said one thing on prime time, and the strategy was to use the words and the concepts that the other ones understand and manipulate all day. And I'll give you two examples. So that example on French TV was I was with two very prominent anti-nuclear people think that by downsizing, but by oversizing nuclear risk as compared to climate risk, you are being climate relativist. It's a form of climate skepticism. And that was just like that blew the room. Like everyone was like, oh, how dare she, call climate skeptics. But that's in effect what they were doing. I mean, if you rate the different risks, exactly what you mentioned, that's exactly what you're doing. So using their words that they understand and they know very well the concepts they put behind. Another example is when we started calling ourselves the whistleblowers. We used to be part of the industry, and as citizens, we've been made aware of a situation that other citizens don't know about. And we came out of our role to inform because I thought it was important that people knew, except that it was a good news rather than a bad one. But the mechanics is the same. We're the whistleblowers. And using their words and their concepts, reapplying them to what you're trying to explain, make it clearer.
Yeah, so I think maybe this is the right place I can ask my question. This time at COP, there were many people talking about fusion, and I just wanted to know, atoms for climate, nuclear for climate, do you also want that the fusion people, when they come to conference, they stay away from the normal fission nuclear people during conference, because they are like so scared to death that the heritage of public acceptance and perception is so bad with fission. They just don't want to inherit this. So I would like to know what you guys think.
More generally, I think we should be cautious. The nuclear's family. I like to say that nuclear is a physics concept, like combustion, or that has many, many applications. So it's not one technology, it's many of them. And I think we should be very cautious at not putting in competition those different nuclear technologies, which is something that is getting started now that we are almost in a nuclear bubble, because they're starting to compete for funds and everything, when before we're kind of all in the same boat. So we need to be careful of that, because it has been a strategy of the anti-nuclear movement to push for fusion, for example. So just that we forget about fission. It's actually what happened at the European Commission, that under the obligations they have under Euratom, which is one of the founding treaty of the European Union, they put all the money to 4 things: waste, radio protection, safety, as you can imagine, and fusion. Which means that current fission and power production is completely obliterated. And what they do is that they know very well that fusion is going to take a certain time, and think that if you kill the bridges to fusion, it will just not happen, because you will not have a workforce, you will not have a public acceptance, no supply chain, no research, no regulatory people that are trained to do it, and so on. So if you advocate for something like fusion only, then you take the risk of killing fusion when it's time for it to come. So there really should be a collaboration between all of those, saying it's a relay race, and at some point everybody's going to play their part, and we should, I think, present a joint front. That also means that Generation 4, I will include Generation 4 in the conversation, and fusion are also clear about not going into that competitive discourse between the different generations.
Yeah. Great. I think we are about out of time. I'll go just for a brief closing thoughts and remarks on our discussion.
I guess I may conclude on the concept of innovation that you asked us from before in communication and elsewhere. I mean, definitely innovation in our field now spurs from very simple things, like the realization that something should be and is not. Then once you realize something should be, seek answers elsewhere, which means even in other fields or opponents that do some things great. I mean, we've copied Greenpeace so many times. So, if they do it well, there must be things to steal from that. That's also innovation, how it works in engineering. It works the same in communication. So realizing there's a gap, going to see elsewhere how other people fill that gap, and then lowering your own boundaries on, should I do it? Is it possible? Is it me the right person? Is everyone agreeing with it or not? If you check all those 3 boxes, then I think you find new ideas, or they come to you, and maybe to conclude on that topic, once I said that, these days I'm pretty wary on innovation and tend to want to put progress back at the beginning of the conversation because we tend to forget progress. Innovation is a very individual thing, short term, make a lot of impact. You don't know if it's going to be good or not. You know, innovation doesn't have to be for the common good. And I think we tend to forget the concept of progress, which is more collective, maybe slower, maybe draws on things that previously existed, like nuclear previously existed, the climate crisis, still is something that is very important for common progress. So I think we should rehabilitate the concept of progress next to the one of innovation.
Thank you and enjoy the rest of the COP.